The boy stood in the doorway like he'd been carved from hunger itself. Samuel Court had seen plenty of drifters come through his ranch over the years. Men with hollow eyes and empty bellies, women with babies wrapped in whatever cloth they could spare, children who'd forgotten what it meant to smile. But this one was different. This one wasn't asking for food or work or mercy. This one was asking for a promise. "If I die," the boy said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his thin frame. "Who will feed my sister?" Samuel stood on the porch of his ranch house, the evening light bleeding orange across the Montana grassland behind him. The boy couldn't have been more than 14, maybe 15 at most. His clothes hung on him like sails on a broken mast, too big in some places, too worn in others. Dust caked his boots, and his hands, small and calloused, gripped the brim of a hat that looked like it had been passed down 3 generations. Behind him, barely visible in the fading light, stood a girl. She was younger, maybe 10, with tangled brown hair and eyes that didn't blink. She didn't speak, she just stood there, one hand clutching the boy's sleeve, the other holding something wrapped in a dirty cloth. Samuel didn't move. He'd learned long ago that the West gave you 2 kinds of silence, the kind that meant peace, and the kind that meant someone was about to ask you for something you couldn't give back. This was the second kind. "What makes you think you're going to die, son?" Samuel asked, his voice low and even. The boy's jaw tightened. "Because I'm sick and I'm getting sicker." Samuel's eyes flicked to the girl, then back to the boy. "What's wrong with you?" "Lung fever started 2 weeks back. Ain't getting better." The boy coughed, a wet rattling sound that confirmed what he'd said. When he pulled his hand away from his mouth, there was a faint smear of red on his palm. He wiped it on his pant leg without looking at it. "Doctor in Hollow Creek said, I got maybe a month, maybe less." Samuel's chest tightened, but his face didn't change. He'd seen lung fever before. It took men twice this boy's size and left them in shallow graves by the roadside. "Where's your folks?" Samuel asked. "Dead, both of them. Ma died in childbirth 3 years ago. P got trampled by a horse last winter." The boy's voice didn't waver. He said it like he was reciting something he'd memorized, something he'd had to repeat so many times it didn't hurt anymore. "It's just me and Lily now." The girl Lily pressed closer to her brother. She still didn't speak. "What's your name?" Samuel asked. "Caleb. Caleb Tate." Samuel nodded slowly. He looked past them toward the road that stretched out into the empty plains. No wagon, no horse, just 2 kids on foot carrying whatever they owned in a bundle that couldn't have weighed more than 10 lb. "How far did you walk?" 3 days, Caleb said from Hollow Creek. Samuel's brow furrowed. Hollow Creek was 40 miles south. 3 days on foot. In this heat, with lung fever eating through his chest, this boy should have been dead already. "Why'd you come here?" Samuel asked. Caleb met his eyes, and for the first time Samuel saw something flicker behind that steady gaze, not fear, not desperation, something harder, hope. "Because they said you were a good man," Caleb said. "They said if anyone would help, it'd be you." Samuel felt the weight of those words settle on him like a stone. He didn't know who they were. Didn't know what stories had traveled from town to ranch to campfire to bring this boy to his door. But he knew what the boy was asking. He was asking Samuel to take care of the one thing he couldn't leave behind. "She don't talk," Caleb said, nodding toward Lily. "Hasn't said a word since Ma died. But she's smart. She can work. She won't be no burden." Samuel's throat tightened. "Son, I ain't asking for charity," Caleb interrupted, his voice cracking just slightly. "I'm asking for a trade. I'll work for you. Every day I got left. I'll work. I'll mend fences, shovel stalls, whatever you need. And when I'm gone, you keep her. You feed her. You make sure she grows up safe." The boy's hand trembled as he held out something toward Samuel. A small leather pouch worn and frayed at the edges. "This is all we got," Caleb said. $12. It ain't much, but it's yours if you say yes." Samuel stared at the pouch. $12. Probably every cent this boy had scraped together from selling whatever his parents had left behind. 12 to buy his sister a future. "Keep your money," Samuel said quietly. Caleb's face fell. "Please, I'm begging you. If you won't take her, I don't know where else to go. She'll end up in some orphanage or worse. And I can't." His voice broke, and for the first time the mask cracked. His eyes welled up, but he blinked hard, forcing the tears back. "I can't leave her alone." Samuel looked at Lily again. She was watching him now, her wide eyes unblinking, like she was waiting for the world to decide whether it would break her or let her be. He thought of his own daughter. She'd be about Lily's age now if she'd lived, if the fever hadn't taken her 10 years ago, along with her mother. He thought of the silence that had filled his house ever since. The empty rooms and cold meals and nights where the wind was the only thing that spoke. He thought of all the reasons he should say no. And then he thought of the boy standing in front of him, holding his sister's hand, asking for the one thing Samuel had never been able to give anyone, a promise. Samuel stepped down from the porch. He walked slowly toward Caleb and Lily, and when he reached them, he knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "You listen to me, son," Samuel said, his voice rough but steady. "You ain't going to die, not if I got anything to say about it. But if you do," he paused, his jaw working, "if you do, I'll take care of her. I give you my word." Caleb stared at him, his breath catching in his throat. "You mean it?" he whispered. "I mean it," Samuel said. Caleb's knees buckled, and Samuel caught him before he hit the ground. The boy clung to him, his thin frame shaking with exhaustion and relief and something that might have been hope. Lily didn't move. She just stood there watching, her small hand still clutching the bundle, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, Samuel Cord made a promise he didn't know if he could keep, but he knew he had to try. Samuel helped Caleb inside and lowered him onto the old couch by the fireplace. The boy's breathing was shallow, each inhale a labor that seemed to cost him more than the last. Lily followed silently, her eyes tracking every movement her brother made, as if she were memorizing him before he disappeared. "When's the last time you ate?" Samuel asked. Caleb tried to answer, but another coughing fit seized him. When it passed, he lay back against the cushions, his face pale as chalk. "Yesterday morning," Lily sighed. Samuel's head snapped toward her. It was the first time he'd heard her voice small and quiet like a bird that had forgotten how to sing. Caleb's eyes widened. "Lily, we had beans," she continued, ignoring her brother's surprise. "Half a can, he gave me most of it." Samuel looked at Caleb, who had turned his face away, embarrassed. "Stay here," Samuel said, standing. "Both of you." He went to the kitchen and lit the stove. He didn't have much beef stew from 2 days ago, some cornbread, a jar of preserves, but it was more than these kids had seen in weeks. He heated the stew and set out 2 bowls, then added a third for himself, though he wasn't hungry. When he returned, Lily was sitting on the floor beside the couch, her hand resting on Caleb's arm. The boy's eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling unevenly. "He needs rest," Samuel said quietly, setting the bowls on the table. "But he needs food first." He woke Caleb gently and helped him sit up. The boy ate slowly, each spoonful in effort. Tea. But he finished half the bowl before his strength gave out. Lily ate without a word, her movements mechanical, like she'd learned long ago not to waste time enjoying things. Samuel watched them in the dim lamplight, and something old and buried stirred in his chest. He'd spent 10 years alone in this house, 10 years convincing himself that solitude was easier than loss, that silence was safer than love. But watching this boy fight to stay conscious long enough to make sure his sister ate, watching this girl sit vigil beside him like a shadow that refused to leave, Samuel realized he'd been wrong. Solitude wasn't easier, it was just emptier. After the meal, Samuel carried Caleb to the spare bedroom, the one that had belonged to his daughter. He hadn't opened the door in years, but the bed was still made, the quilt still folded at the foot. Dust covered everything. But it would do. He laid Caleb down and pulled the quilt over him. The boy's eyes fluttered open. "Thank you," Caleb whispered. "Rest," Samuel said. "We'll talk in the morning." But Caleb's hand shot out and gripped Samuel's wrist with surprising strength. "If I don't wake up, you will," Samuel said firmly. "But if I don't," Caleb insisted, his eyes burning with desperation, "you got to promise me something else." Samuel waited. "Don't let her forget me," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "Don't let her think I left her on purpose. Make sure she knows I tried." Samuel's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. Caleb's grip loosened and his eyes closed. Within moments he was asleep. Samuel stood there for a long time, staring down at the boy's face, so young, so worn, so determined to hold on just a little longer. Then he left the room and found Lily sitting on the floor outside the door, her knees pulled to her chest, the bundle still clutched in her arms. "You can sleep in my room," Samuel said gently. "I'll take the couch." Lily shook her head. "I'm staying here," she said, her voice barely audible. "In case he needs me." Samuel didn't argue. He brought her a blanket and a pillow, and she curled up on the floor like a dog guarding its master. He returned to the living room and sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He thought about the promise he'd made. He thought about the weight of it, the impossibility of it. He thought about what it would mean if Caleb died, if he had to raise this girl, teach her to trust again, help her find her voice in a world that had taken everything from her. He thought about all the ways he could fail. And then, he thought about his own daughter, and the promise he'd made to her mother the night she died. Take care of her no matter what. He hadn't been able to keep that promise. The fever had been too strong, the doctor too far, the winter too cruel. He'd held his daughter's hand and watched the light leave her eyes. And he'd carried that failure with him every day since. But maybe this was his chance to make it right. Not for him's. LF. Not for redemption or forgiveness or peace for them. The next morning, Caleb didn't wake up. Samuel stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching the boy's chest rise and fall in shallow labored breaths. His fever had spiked during the night, and his skin was hot to the touch. Lily sat beside him, holding his hand, her face blank. "We need a doctor," Samuel said. "There's no doctor," Lily replied, her voice flat. "Not for 40 miles. And even if there was, he'd just say the same thing the last one did." "We have to try. He's dying," Lily said. And the way she said it, so calm, so certain, made Samuel's blood run cold. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw tears in her eyes. "But he ain't dead yet," she whispered. Samuel knelt beside her. "No, he ain't." "Then we still got time," Lily said, her small hand tightening around her brother's. "We still got time to keep the promise." Samuel didn't know if she meant his promise or Caleb's, or some promise they'd made to each other long before they ever walked up his porch, but he knew she was right. They still had time, and he was going to use every second of it. The fever broke on the third day. Samuel had spent those 72 hours in a kind of waking nightmare, boiling water, soaking rags, forcing willow bark tea down Caleb's throat while the boy thrashed and muttered things that didn't make sense. Lee never left his side. She slept on the floor, ate when Samuel made her, and spoke only to tell him when Caleb's breathing changed or when his fever spiked again. On the morning of the third day, Caleb opened his eyes. "Lily," he rasped. She was beside him in an instant, her small hand pressed to his cheek. "I'm here," she said. Caleb's gaze shifted to Samuel, who stood in the doorway, exhausted and unshaven. "You kept me alive," Caleb said, his voice weak but clear. "You kept yourself alive," Samuel replied. "I just helped." Caleb tried to sit up, but his arms gave out. Samuel crossed the room and propped him up with pillows. "How long was I out?" Caleb asked. 3 days. Caleb's eyes widened. 3. He looked at Lily, panic flashing across his face. "You've been taking care of her?" "She's been taking care of you," Samuel said, "and doing a damn fine job of it." Caleb reached for his sister's hand and held it tight. "I'm sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't speak. Samuel left them alone and went outside to breathe. The morning was cool and still, the kind of quiet that usually brought him peace. But today, it felt different. Today, it felt like the pause before a storm. He was right. The riders came just after noon. Samuel was mending a section of fence when he heard the hoofbeats, steady, deliberate, coming from the south. He straightened and shaded his eyes against the sun. 3 men, maybe 4. His gut tightened. He walked back to the house and found Lily on the porch, her eyes fixed on the approaching dust cloud. "Get inside," Samuel said quietly. "Stay with Caleb. Don't come out unless I tell you." She didn't argue. She slipped through the door and disappeared. Samuel waited. The riders came into view. 4 men, all armed, all wearing the hard-weathered look of men who made their living, taking what wasn't theirs. The one in front was older, maybe 50, with a scar running down the side of his face. His eyes swept over the ranch with the practiced gaze of someone appraising property. They stopped 20 feet from the porch. "Help you?" Samuel asked, his voice calm. The scarred man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Boone. We're looking for someone. Lot of empty land out here," Samuel said, easy to get lost. "Not lost," Boone said, running. 2 kids, boy and a girl. Heard they might have come this way." Samuel's face didn't change. "Why you looking for them?" "That's our business." "You're on my land," Samuel said evenly. "That makes it my business." Boone's smile faded. "Boy stole something. Something that don't belong to him." "What?" "He steal money from a man in Hollow Creek. Man who wants it back." Samuel's jaw tightened. "How much?" $12. The number hung in the air like a noose. Samuel thought of the leather pouch Caleb had tried to give him. The $12 the boy had offered in exchange for his sister's life. He thought of Caleb's trembling hands and desperate eyes. That boy earned that money, Samuel said, working for his paw before he died. Ain't stealing if it's yours. Boone's eyes narrowed. So, you have seen them? Samuel didn't answer. One of the other riders, a younger man with a cruel mouth, leaned forward in his saddle. We ain't leaving without them, old man. You can hand them over, or we can take them. Your choice. Samuel's hand drifted toward his belt where his revolver hung. I think you boys should ride on, he said quietly. Boone studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You know what you're doing, protecting them. I know exactly what I'm doing. That boy's dying, Boone said. Lung fever. Everyone in Hollow Creek knows it. He'll be dead in a week, maybe 2. And when he's gone, that girl will be all alone. You think you can protect her forever? Long as I'm breathing, Samuel said. Boone's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Won't be the first time. The 4 men sat there, the tension thick enough to choke on. Samuel could feel his heart pounding, could feel the weight of the gun at his hip, could feel the eyes of the children watching from inside the house. Finally Boone pulled his reins and turned his horse. We'll be back, he said, and next time, we won't be asking. The riders left, their hoof-beats fading into the distance. Samuel stood on the porch, watching until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he went inside. Caleb was sitting up in bed, his face pale but his eyes fierce. They were lying, he said immediately. I didn't steal nothing. That money was mine. My pa earned it working for Boone's boss, a man named Hackett. He runs half the businesses in Hollow Creek, and he don't pay fair. My pa died before he could collect his last wages, so I went and took what was owed. How much did your pa earn? Samuel asked. $30. I took 12. That's what he owed us for the last month of work. Samuel believed him. He'd met men like Hackett before. Men who built empires on the backs of people too desperate or too scared to fight back. They're coming back. Samuel said, I know, Caleb said quietly. He looked at Lily who sat beside him, her face unreadable. You should let them take me. If I'm gone, they'll leave her alone. No, Lily said, her voice sharp. No, Lily. No, she repeated louder this time. I won't let them. Samuel looked at the girl, this small, silent, broken girl, and saw something he hadn't seen before. Strength. Neither will I, Samuel said. That night Samuel made stew again. They ate together at the table, Samuel, Caleb, and Lily, like a family that had existed longer than 3 days. The lamplight flickered across their faces, softening the hard edges of fear and exhaustion. Tell me about your pa, Samuel said. Caleb looked up from his bowl, surprised. Why? Because I want to know. Caleb hesitated, then set down his spoon. He was a good man, worked hard, never complained. Even when things got bad, he used to tell me and Lily stories at night about knights and dragons and all that. Made up stuff, but it made her smile. He glanced at his sister. She used to smile a lot before Ma died. Lily's gaze dropped to her lap. What happened to your ma? Samuel asked gently. Childbirth, Caleb said. Baby didn't make it either. P said it was just bad luck, but I think it broke something in him. He kept working, kept taking care of us, but he wasn't the same. And then the horse kicked him, and he was gone too. Samuel nodded slowly. Your pa would be proud of you. What you doing for your sister? Caleb's eyes glistened. I'm not doing enough. I'm dying and she's going to be alone. And his voice cracked. I can't stop it. Samuel reached across the table and gripped the boy's shoulder. Listen to me, son. You did something most grown men wouldn't have the courage to do. You walked 40 meters with fever in your lungs to make sure your sister had a future. That's more than enough. That's everything. Caleb wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You really going to take care of her? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I gave you my word, Samuel said. And I keep my word, Caleb nodded, his throat working. Thank you. Lily stood abruptly and walked to the window. She stood there staring out at the dark plains, her small frame silhouetted against the glass. Samuel and Caleb exchanged a glance. Lily, Caleb said softly. She didn't turn around. I remember Ma's stories too, she said, her voice distant. She used to tell me about a place where nothing bad ever happened, where people didn't die and families stayed together, and the sun was always warm. She paused. I used to think that place was real. I used to think if we just walked far enough, Jeesh, we'd find it. Caleb's face crumpled. Lily, but it's not real, she continued, her voice steady despite the tears running down her cheeks. It's never been real, and I'm tired of pretending. Samuel stood and walked over to her. He knelt down so he was at her level. You're right, he said quietly. That place don't exist. The world's hard and it's cruel and it takes things from us we can't get back. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But there's something else, something just as real. And that's people who fight for each other, even when it's hard. People who make promises and keep them. People who hold on, even when letting go would be easier. Lily turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. Your brother didn't walk 40 miles because he thought he'd find some perfect place. Samuel said he did it because he loves you. And that's real. That's the realest thing there is. Lily's lip trembled. What if he dies? Then you keep going, Samuel said. You keep going because that's where he wanted. That's what he fought for. And you don't do it alone. You do it with people who care about you. Like you, she whispered. Like me, Samuel said. Lily stared at him for a long moment, and then slowly she nodded. She walked back to the table and sat down beside her brother. Caleb put his arm around her and she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them bound together by something stronger than blood. Hope. Later that night, after Caleb had gone to bed and Lily had finally fallen asleep on the couch, Samuel sat alone by the fire. He thought about the riders who would come back. He thought about the fight that was coming, the danger that loomed over this fragile makeshift family he'd somehow become part of. He thought about his daughter and the promise he'd broken. And he thought about the promise he'd made to Caleb, a promise he intended to keep, no matter the cost. The fire crackled and outside the wind whispered Ed through the grass. Samuel closed his eyes and made peace with what was coming. They came at dawn. Samuel had been awake for hours, sitting on the porch with his rifle across his lap, watching the horizon. He'd sent Caleb and Lily to the cellar beneath the house, an old storm shelter his wife had insisted on building years ago. It was small and dark, but it was safe. Don't come out until I say, he'd told them. Caleb had tried to argue, but Samuel had silenced him with a look. You stay alive, Samuel had said. That's how you help now. As the sun broke over the ridge, Samuel saw them not 4 riders this time but 8. Boone had brought reinforcements. They stopped at the edge of the property, and Boone dismounted. He walked forward alone, his hands spread in a gesture of peace. We don't want trouble, Boone called out. Then leave, Samuel replied, standing. Can't do that. Hackett wants what's his. The boy didn't steal nothing. That money was earned. Hackett says different. And around yeah. What Hackett says is law. Samuel's jaw tightened. Not on my land. Boone sighed. You're outnumbered, old man. You can't win this. Maybe not, Samuel said. But I can make it cost you. Boone studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. You're going to die for 2 kids you don't even know. I know them, Samuel said quietly. And that's enough. Boone's face hardened. He turned and walked back to his men. Samuel raised his rifle. The first shot came from one of Boone's men, a warning shot that kicked up dust at Samuel's feet. Samuel didn't flinch. He aimed and fired, and one of the riders yelped as his hat flew off his head. Next one won't miss, Samuel called out. Chaos erupted, bullets tore through the air, splintering wood and shattering windows. Samuel dropped to one knee behind the post and returned fire. His movements calm and deliberate. He'd been a soldier once, a lifetime ago, and the old instincts came back like muscle memory. One rider went down, then another, but there were too many of them. A bullet grazed Samuel's shoulder, and he hissed in pain. Blood soaked through his shirt, but he kept firing. And then from the ridge behind the ranch, another shot rang out. One of Boone's men fell from his horse, clutching his chest. Samuel's head snapped toward the ridge and his breath caught. Riders, a dozen of them, maybe more, pouring down the hillside. At the front was a man. Samuel recognized Tom Bridger, a rancher from 10 miles north. Behind him were other men from neighboring ranches. Men Samuel had helped over the years, men who owed him nothing but had come anyway. Boone's remaining men scattered, their horses rearing in panic. Boone himself turned and ran, disappearing into the chaos. Within minutes it was over. Tom Bridger dismounted and walked over to Samuel, who was leaning against the porch, clutching his bleeding shoulder. You all right? Tom asked. I'll live, Samuel said, wincing. Heard Boone was coming. Tom said, figured you could use some help. Samuel looked at him, then at the other men who had ridden in. How'd you know? Tom grinned. Words fast. Everyone knows you took in those kids. Everyone knows Hackett's been trying to run them down. We figured it was time someone stood up to him. Samuel's throat tightened. I didn't ask for this. Didn't have to. Tom said, "You've been helping folks around here for years. We figured it was time to return the favor." Samuel nodded, unable to speak. Tom clapped him on the back. "Get that shoulder looked at. We'll make sure Hackett knows he's not welcome here anymore." As the men rode off, Samuel made his way to the cellar. He opened the door and found Caleb and Lily huddled together in the dark, their eyes wide with fear. "It's over," Samuel said. "You're safe." Caleb let out a shaky breath. And Lily burst into tears. Samuel helped them out and led them back into the house. They sat together in the living room surrounded by broken glass and bullet holes. And for the first time in days, they all allowed themselves to breathe. Caleb didn't die. The fever didn't come back. And slowly, day by day, his strength returned. He worked on the ranch alongside Samuel, learning how to mend fences and care for horses and all the things a boy needed to know to survive in the West. Lily found her voice again. It started with small words, "Thank you," "Good morning," "I'm hungry," and grew from there. She laughed for the first time 3 months after they arrived, and Samuel realized it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. The three of them became a family, not by blood, but by choice. Years later, long after Caleb had grown into a man and started a ranch of his own, and long after Lily had married a kind man from town and built a life full of love and laughter, Samuel would sit on his porch and watch the sun set over the plains. He thought about the promise he'd made that first night when a dying boy had stood in his doorway and asked him to take care of his sister. He thought about the words Caleb had spoken, "If I die, who will feed my sister?" And he thought about his answer, "I will, son." It had been a promise born out of desperation and hope. A promise that had changed all of their lives. Samuel had kept it, and in keeping it he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. A reason to keep going, a reason to believe that the world, for all its cruelty, still had room for mercy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel closed his eyes and smiled. He'd made a lot of mistakes in his life, but this hadn't been one of